Can we find God in the shadow? Well, what do I mean by that? I view life from a psychological perspective. Ever since I began the study of Carl Jung's philosophy many years ago, I've come to do that. I started coming to St. Peter's when Brewster Beach was here, because he was a Jungian analyst in addition to being an Episcopal priest. I've read since then an awful lot of Jung's work, and I've even studied in Zurich at the Jung Center, because I was so taken by, I started with Jung because it came from a Christian point of view. And when I sort of lost faith completely and left the Catholic Church, I had no place to go. And this was because I'm interested in psychology and the human mind and how we work and how we relate to each other. I thought that was, the Jungian stuff might be interesting, and it did indeed become so. And Brewster was, as we know, sui generis, but he had a lot to say about that, and I kept working on it. And thanks to Lisa, I went to Zurich. We flew together, actually, to Vienna, and then I went to Zurich. People speak of God, and they speak of the shadow, but what defines these two concepts? Let me give you Jung's definition of God before I proceed. This is slightly more universal than what I have to say today, because I'm just really wanting to open up some thinking for you. But Jung's definition of God is really arresting. And I quote, "To this day, God is the name by which I designate all things that cross my willful path violently and recklessly, all things that upset my subjective views, plans, and intentions, and change the course of my life for better or worse." Now that definition takes a lot of thinking. I have some copies of it, by the way, if anyone wants one. I've been reading that and looking at it and thinking about it for 20 years. I think it needs to be reread. It'll probably mean something different to anyone and everyone who reads it. But many people would say if something stops you cold, that God is sending you a message. Whatever idiom you might use for religion or for God, higher power, supreme being, etc., something's going on when your usual course of life is interrupted one way or another. And if nothing else, these interruptions are meant to have you stop, reflect. Is God in the shadow? Well, what's the shadow? I'm using Carl Jung's kind of analysis of the shadow. His concept would say that basically we're born whole, but in the cultural process, we sort out our God-given characteristics into those that are acceptable in society and those that have to be hidden. It's wonderful and necessary, says Jung, because we need a civilized society. So we have to learn to be polite. First of all, we have to be nice as babies in order to get fed. We have to get someone to pay attention, so we know we behave properly, we get what we want, more or less, as babies. And that continues. But the unacceptable qualities don't go away. They're hidden in the shadow, in the dark corners of our personality, our psychology. When they're hidden long enough, they take on a personality of their own, and that's called the shadow. The shadow is that which has not entered adequately into our consciousness. And so thus we become ego and shadow. Another important concept of Carl Jung is projection. So we take what's in the shadow and we project it on others. The toughest lesson I've ever had to learn is about shadow projection. For example, there was another lawyer who was down the hall from me in my office in Poughkeepsie. And we used to bring bag lunches when we were in those rushing days when I had to be at court at 1 o'clock or something like that. And she would come to my office to eat lunch, and she would waltz in late, sit down, and end up leaving crumbs all over and rushing out again back to her office. And I get so annoyed, incredibly annoyed. Until one day I thought, oh my God, am I really like that? Yeah, I am. I can be lazy, I can be sloppy, I can be thoughtless. And those are the easy parts of the shadow. There's other stuff in our shadows that's way deeper. And as Ed Sermies wanted to say, I'm not going to my shadow, believe me. And so we're afraid of it. But here's the thing, one of the things that I think is so wonderful. Robert Johnson it was a Jungian analyst, now deceased, who lived in San Diego. A wonderful man who wrote this. Generally, the ordinary, mundane characteristics are the norm for people. Anything less than this goes into the shadow. Some of the pure gold of our personality is relegated to the shadow because it can find no place in the great leveling process that is culture. People resist the noble aspects of their shadow more strenuously than they hide the dark sides. And that's where I think, if you start looking, you can be surprised. Our hero worship is part of the shadow. That's where we're looking, oh, you know, we're in love with some basketball star or some, I don't know, rock star. That's not my purview. And we refuse to look at the fine qualities that we might have. We lay them on somebody else, just as we lay our shadow projections on others, our bad parts and our good parts. So it takes a lot of living, it takes a lot of knowing, but I have really begun to believe that God really wants us to be that whole person that we came into this world as. And in order to do that, for me anyway, I have to keep realizing that shadow qualities are really, really important, and they could even have some good stuff in them. It's as if we don't want the good parts. We're afraid to be anything but. We all try to be a certain norm. You know, we want to fit in to whatever cultural group we belong to or whatever place we live in and so forth. But we have to challenge ourselves. And the other really wonderful thing about understanding or reading more about the shadow is that it helps you to accept your friends when they do something weird, or your neighbors, or your co-workers and so forth. Some people can be very challenging, and that's their shadow operating. And when we see that we can be challenging too. I'm the one who talks too much and is a know-it-all at times, and again, those are only surface shadow. I'm not telling you the real stuff. We lay it all on someone else, and we expect that that they're the bad guy. And when I'm exaggerating, which I do quite often, I say that that's the problem with the world. Any level of any problem with the world, including the present government and the state of the world, it's shadow projection, almost always. We are the good guys. We always think we're the good guys. I must say, though, that in my group of friends, I think, and I would consider all of you in that group, we're willing to say this country isn't perfect. We're willing to say things like that. I suppose Jung would probably say that this country has shadow as well. So that's what I have to say, and I'm hoping it just opens up thought process for any and all of you to think about what it might mean to you to investigate your shadow more. This is Robert Johnson's wonderful book about owning your own shadow, which I have. The nice thing about this book is it's so small and it's easy reading. It's actually easy reading, and it will give you some very good ideas about this ego and shadow. And so this is the way I can view. These are the sort of parameters that I use in my life to try to get closer to becoming whole again. And that, to me, is what spirituality and religion is all about. I have some other books that I could talk about. If anybody really wants to know what's wrong with them and what they can do about it, this is the best book ever written. This is James Hollis, who talks about the middle passage, which is that time in the middle of your life that you could be 7 or you could be 70. The midlife crisis comes and you realize there's something else. It's not just this persona. That's not the job I go to. It's not what I wear and who I see. There's a lot more going on. It's truly a lot of this is only for people who are searchers. But most of us are, or we wouldn't be coming to St. Peter's. We doubt, we think, we do a lot. We don't always love and we don't always worship. But if we think God is love, then God wants us to love each other, and we can love the challenges of other people just as well as the good parts. So ask me questions or go to church, whatever. Lois.
Once you start looking at your shadow, and recognize your shadow perhaps as projected in negative ways.
When you get really angry about something,
I'm sorry?
when you get angry about
When you
something,
get angry.
that's
Okay,
your
so
shadow,
then-
something's happening.
Yeah, so what do you do about it? First you recognize it, and then you say, I can't be angry now?
No.
What
No,
do you-
I don't, I think it's perfectly legitimate to be angry. There are things to be angry about. But I always think, because I'm an analyst basically at heart, luckily, and I can't predict the future, I can only analyze the past. So you think, wait a minute, take a step back. What is this bothering me? Why is it bothering me? What just happened that bothered me? Is there something about myself that I need to look at a little more deeply? And to me, it's kind of a form of prayer to say, oh, wait, stepping back and being quiet and thinking about it. I find extremely important. I don't think for a minute that I do it all the time. Sometimes I just keep going forward. So,
Thank you.
yeah.